Hello, short, sturdy creatures fond of drink and industry. We are going to cover the latest of a series of batches of graphical updates, particularly some fantastic animation news for the Steam version of Dwarf Fortress coming out soon. We're going to have to go back for a few of these pictures due to the ending of school and me losing an inordinate amount of time trying to get my live stream up on the archive channel. But going ahead, first of all, we recently, or previously, discussed how they were doing transparency across multiple Z levels so that you could see multiple Z levels, but also tell where an item or creature was by how far down it was. The further down it was, the more opaque the fog of elves or the fog of war becomes. They have decided, much to my pleasure, I would say, to program in something called crown shyness, which is that trees, their leaves don't actually directly intermingle with each other. They try to avoid it. They try to be separate entities. So this is now going to be in Dwarf Fortress. And if you combine this with what we previously discussed, this means that you can see lower Z levels through the tops of trees. Namely, if you look at this gap here, we can see the hill down, we can see the floor, we can see the edge of its little root sticking out. We can see the bottom of a trunk sticking out over there and up there. What this means, tying into what we learned previously, where certain larger creatures are going to have multiple Z levels, or not multiple Z levels, I'm sorry, are going to have multiple tiles for the graphical depictions, means it would now be possible to see dragons, ettins, other large creatures walking around on the ground through the trees, making it so that you don't necessarily need to go to the exact Z level to see the animal. Another quality of life improvement that a lot of us probably didn't think too much about, but is going to really bring to life the world of Dwarf Fortress. Speaking of shadows, tree trunks, and the trees, they are now programming in an aura, a nimbus, a natural shadow around all tree trunks, you know, more identifying that they are there and where they are. And if we see at mass, you know, you can identify easily every tree trunk because it darkens the grass and the bushes around it. And I would like to be clear on that. It's darkening the thing around it. The lower left corner of this bush here is light. The upper right is dark. That's completely dark. That's completely dark. It physically darkens whatever is there. It is a layer of shadowy transparency that is rendered on top of whatever is below. It is not a separate thing unto itself. We can see this more in depth when we look at one of their recent animation updates that we did, and we see that the dark circle has naturally generated itself over the water. And if we look at the other tree here, we can see that it even crosses the stone, barely crosses the water, crosses the grass. So the tree is rendering that, and we'll look at that more in detail when we get to the full animations. That shadow doesn't move, so it is something separate, at least right now. Those shadows as well are programmed in such a way that they are able to overlay each other, and the overlap will be darker. That way it doesn't look just like some homogeneous mass whenever you end up in the middle of a forest and those damn evil elves prevent you from chopping down any of the trees. And while we are here, in this particular picture, they showed off one of their ideas for how stockpiles are going to be working. I personally really like this idea. It makes it so that each individual square is clearly marked off by the transparency effects that they are enabling. But because of the way that they are now trying to render things in like a 2.5D, you know, simulate a 3D feel, the fencing around it actually sticks into it down below and sticks out to the square above it up above, so that you can easily see which square that the items go into, while also getting a nice natural feel that this is really what is going on. They are deciding to have all these signs, from what I read, try to be dynamic. I don't know what it would do if you just enable everything or disable everything, but we can see that we have food, water, furniture, finished goods. No, this is finished goods, rings and the like, and then wood, which is not currently set in. Also, as part of the shading thing, the shade does overlap into their stockpile system. In this particular picture, they've taken the stockpile system and switched it to a grid pattern. I kind of like the shade from the last picture we saw, but if they're doing the shading from the tree, this version might need to be what they go with, just so they gel well together. I don't know how this actually looked with both a tree shadow and the stockpile shadow. However, if you're going to be doing a grid pattern for the stockpile shadow to show off every square, this does let us see every square easier than just having to count out the areas between the fence posts, as well as it's still using that shaded effect where even the darker areas on this look different to these ones down here. So these are two different types of shades, two different types of transparencies they're applying, as well as we can see that they're starting to detail out the weapons. So we can see here that we have weapons, armor, and trap components, but still looks like a part of the weapon stockpile, of course. But we can identify the weapons. We have a mace, an axe, or training axe, I should say, training sword. I want to say training halberd, spear, something from the polearm category. Hammer, regular sword, pickaxe. And I'm not just identifying that this is training as opposed to regular. You know, this might in fact be wood. I'm going off of the fact that it is all brown, so I'm assuming wood is the material. And over here we see trap components, we see saws, the big screw, spikes, spike balls, giant axe blade. Because they have clarified that when you see the weapons, they have started working into how each weapon's material will affect its rendering. So you can identify out whether or not it's obsidian, adamantine, copper, bronze, I want to say platinum, silver, iron, no, maybe steel, iron, gold, and I don't know, tin? No, tin's not a good sword. What the hell am I talking about? Okay, I don't know all the materials myself, but they are each clearly demarcated from each other, much to the chagrin of the handler here. And if we take that, combining with how they're trying to represent everything individually, as opposed to just trying to make one symbol that represents certain categories, such as bladed weapons, pole arms, range, what have you, we can clearly identify all the different weapons. Whips, cat o' nine tails, bow, crossbow, blowgun, hammer, big war hammer, mace, no. Spiked club? Mace? Mace is the one with the ball, right? War axe. No, this is the mace. What is the one with the ball? I cannot remember at this time. But also we can see that we have the creatures and how it's nice adaptive rendering system. They're working it in so that each of the little features of every creature is being represented, because we have a mole and a mole man, I believe, a molekin, a mole something, crazy mole creature. While we're here, we're gonna take a few seconds out of moving through everything to address the fact that they have made walls more three-dimensional. They've added an aura of shadow around all the walls, so that if you were to be not quite so zoomed in, the walls would definitely almost have a what's the term when something moves behind something else? I'm forgetting what the term is right now, but it looks like it's projecting in front of you. It looks like the walls are in fact physically closer than the picture itself, as opposed to some of their other older pictures where you could tell where the walls are, but it looks like it's one flat thing across. They're now working on building up a proper orating system, as well as I want to say they're doing something besides that to get the effect of this layering over on top of what is below. But once you start getting into that technology, that is slightly above me. What they don't point out, what they didn't mention when they showed this picture though, that I would just love to draw your attention to, is the water around it. Later on we'll be discussing the brooks and the ponds, but this is the first time that we see actual depth to the water. They're rendering the ramps below in the water. We can see flat, we can see wall, but we can still see that ramping system that we saw from multiple Z levels before. If this works across multiple Z levels, you'll be able to see the creatures swimming in the water. Well, not necessarily swimming, but existing there if they're not the top Z level. As opposed to, say, when you look at a Z level, like you have a reservoir that has multiple Z levels, 4 or 5, you know, you got to flood out that hospital and kill your lichened, infected dwarves at some point. If something like a troll gets in there or an orc and they're swimming around, they always go down first. They go down like 2 or 3 Z levels. So you got to go up and you got to go down to Z levels to find the orc. If this water is rendering properly across multiple Z levels, maybe it can only do 1 down, we don't know. But even with just 1 down, it will be easier to identify when something is in the water. Again, another nice quality of life improvement, but I don't think they drew attention to it. For the post for this, they talked about the weapons and the creatures, and then they just kind of had the water in the background, just like a test to see if anyone made a comment about it, I guess. But this is the first time we've seen water like that in these pictures, so I would have thought that they would have drawn attention to that. Maybe it's a work in progress, but if it is, I hope that they stick with this the way it is and or go down this line, because taking the multiple Z levels and applying that same more bluish transparent effect to do multiple Z levels in water is fan-freaking-tastic. Now, I use this as a comparison for the old way they were doing walls, but in this picture, they released how rail lines were looking, and you guys know me, I love my rail lines. I don't use them a lot. I tend to just end up, losing my mind and smashing everything. But when I do have them working, I do like them to look nice. And we can see that they've clearly delineated all the different types. We have constructed and not constructed. The engraved don't have the crossbars, as would be required for a constructed rail system. And the constructed rail system, you can see that while it is still a rail, you can identify the material at a glance without having to hit K or anything like that. You can identify at a glance what it is because of the crossbars being brown for wood type materials, gray for stone type materials, and just for funsies, they're still showing in the little oars here. However, counter to what I was assuming before, that maybe this was a different layering system, I'm thinking that we just got lucky in that one, that it was the same type of stone. Because in this one, it looks like the oars are, their stone is slightly different from the wall around it. It is no longer the same type of, it looked like it blended in completely naturally. So we'll have to walk back the theory crafting on that one. It just happens to have a gray base, and there is a particular type of stone, which I'm guessing this type of gem is found more commonly in, that it blends in with. It doesn't necessarily blend in with all types of stones surrounding it. But we also see a very nice natural way to represent the west-northeast and the north-southeast rail tracks, so you can easily, well, not easily, so that you can identify at a glance exactly what is going on. Because if you built one of these and you did it wrong, you would see immediately that that is not going to work. So you're not having to sit there going down your entire track trying to figure out what's wrong. They don't have any track stops. These are just natural track ends. So I'm wondering what a track stop is going to look like that you could build on top of these. I'm assuming with the quality work that they've shown thus far that it's going to be amazing. And of course, we just have a little old hero, the up-down stairwell, showing descending down into the darkness and ascending up into the Z level above. I like little touches. Now, some of you on my last video were a bit of little grumpykins. You were Dwarf Fortress purists, and you demanded that Dwarf Fortress be in ASCII. You said that graphics was not the way of the future, and that anyone who depended upon graphics was in fact bringing down the quality of the game for everyone else. So I'm going to point out a few things to you about why you don't need to worry, and why this is going to not be as bad as I think some of you naysayers were implying. So I've taken a few screenshots from a video Toady1 did, where he's showing generating a world and some early gameplay footage, and I'll link that video in the description down below.
And hopefully let a lot more people play it. Dwarf Fortress is a...
But what I want to point out is I took live, and if I zoom out, you can see this is in the middle of world creation. I took a screenshot of the live world creation that Toady1 was doing at that time. And I want to point out, just for references, this looks like, this is what I'm going to call the right hand. Looks like a little thumb, pointer, middle, ring, pinky. Looks like a hand looking to the right. Light green area, river going to a mountain, and the mountain's got a gash in it. All right? Not going into details on the graphics. This was essentially cut from a YouTube video, but we need to agree on what the common terrain features are. That's going to be very important, because these were the older graphics. This is a newer graphic to the same thing, and we can see, first of all, this is the same map. Thumb, pointer, middle, ring, pinky, light green area, river going into a cut in the mountains. But we can already see that this is far easier to understand what's going on in these mountains. Over here, there are some brown, and yes, YouTube artifacting might be the cause of some of this, but we see some brown. We see lines going around. We kind of see some buildings in amongst the mountains. What is going on? Now, not even accounting for the lack of artifacting, I think we can all agree that the new road system is far easier to recognize. You can immediately identify the different types of dwarven outposts, forts, not mountain homes, what do they call them? Metropolises? I'm forgetting the term right now. We can see where all the little evil cretins are, the evil zones, the freaking tree hugger territory, and I believe if we go over here, you can even see some of the human establishments. So at a glance, first of all, easily able to recognize where everything is. I love the fact that they are doing multiple conglomerates. They're adding things together to determine what it actually looks like. We have the natural mountains. Some of the mountain ends up in the evil area. It looks the exact same as mountains, but now it's purple. But of course, the little dwarven house isn't, and it hasn't gone completely through. The evil area going through the marsh looks like the marsh, just happens to be evil. We're going to compare this to the old version, but before we do, again, this is the same map that was generated live in front of us. This was done in front of us. This is not something that they just drew together, because they also released an old map to compare the two things together. And I'd like to point out, thumb, pointer, middle, think ring, pinky, blue area, river going into a cut in the mountains. The reason why I point this out is, one, the new graphics just look amazing. They do. But second of all, they generated it on an older graphical system that they updated, and then they were still able to do the exact same thing in ASCII. Now, I know we kind of already have something similar to that with the current graphic sets, where it's kind of maybe possible to re-update it back down, but then you have to deal with some maybe stability issues, what have you. The point is, the new system doesn't exclude it. It is a natural system built in that they were able to take the same world, update it to the new graphics, have it put out this picture, and then they were able to update it again. So anything that we are getting for graphical improvements and optimizations to the game, you can still apparently just decide to do it in the original ASCII. This is not taking away from any of you naysayers. So I don't generally tend to be antagonistical in my videos, but those of you who are trying to be pure Dwarf Fortress players and are demanding, that we stick with the original ASCII, no one is stopping you from doing that with the new engine. You should still get the Steam version. You should support this, because any system that they do to make this work smoothly requires inherent optimizations and rewrites of the underlying code, which means this ASCII system is going, or should, run smoother, not accounting for any bugs that may accrue, but this should still be optimized and run better than what you are dealing with now. Because if we take the old adage that the graphical tile sets are going to run slower than the ASCII, and I have nothing to back this up on, if we take that same rules and apply it to the new graphic system, that it will run slower than ASCII. But they're wanting it to run the same as it currently is, that the current game does. That means that they have to do optimizations, which means these maps will run smoother and or faster. You get what I'm saying? Anything that we all get to enjoy for graphics, you get to enjoy for optimizations. If this isn't making your beard hairs stick out, I don't know what will. I genuinely do not understand what you'd be holding out on at this point. The same engine's capable of doing both things at the drop of a dime. It's fantastic. Starting to go into animations, part of that same video, so I'm gonna have to apologize for the slightly crummy quality of this picture. Ripping it off of YouTube, and YouTube artifacting ruined everything. And the video that Toady1 played, where it was live gameplay footage, he dug into the mountain and he built a carpenter's workshop. And we saw that what we saw live, the screenshot we saw before where it had the loading bar. However, the loading bar is not the only thing that changes. As we go through this, first of all, I'd like to point out, red, dwarf, but everything around this is gray, particularly this back area. Because of YouTube artifacting, this is going to be slightly less clear if you're not looking for what I'm about to talk about. So this is all very, very gray. when it updates to the yellow part and it goes from starting crafting to, you know, nearly crafted or, you know, middle of operations, this back area has grabbed a brown tint. And that's not just YouTube artifacting, because if we were to take YouTube artifacting, it should be going green and yellow, not quite as brown as the shading is starting to take in. If you bring that further, when the bottom bar goes green, it's now very clear that that is in fact brown. So as the bottom area becomes more and more green till completion, the top area is becoming more and more colored. And now we see very clearly that it is brown when the bar goes away. There's two ways they are rendering this. I don't know which one they are using. These are my two theories on it, because both of these have implications for modding and improving once this hits Steam. Theory one that I have: the bar is rendered on top of. The bar is rendered on top of it, and everything is done via shading. In other words, they've just taken this area and reduced the saturation on it to get that graying effect, because it's only slightly more brown. It's not like there's new things that have color suddenly. Then as we get up, it becomes more and more brown, and then finally when it hits blue, they've taken off the filter that is reducing the saturation and the bar. That's theory one. That is good for modders if that is what they're doing, because that means the engine is capable of selectively applying to just entities and or buildings itself shadings, which means for certain things that have different states, like when they're in construction or walls and such forth, modders and people who do different tiles, do different graphics, will be able to get different things to pop up at different times. If you can work with that, you can change the actual color of things as it works. That's one idea. The other thing is that these are in fact 4 different sprites that it's using as it creates. If that is what they're doing, then that should, running over my own tongue, then that should also, if that's what they're doing, be able to help modders and graphical minded beardlings, because you can make each and every step be a different picture. Imagine building the walls. The low-level wall, you just see like the wood on the ground. Starting to set up, you see that they've got like some cross bracing or something. Nearly done. You see all of the planks or stones inlaid, but with clearly something missing, like it's missing a right corner. And then fully complete, it just looks like a wall. It should be possible, no matter which one of these things that the engine is using, for modders to have a field day with it. So we should end up with a lot of variety, depending upon how well this does. Lot of variety with what is heading on. Now, the focus of the video, the titular animation. They put out some pictures recently where they pointed out that they've started to build in proper animation. We can see this here. This is a brook, and we do in fact have 16 frames of animation. And if we zoom in a little bit while this is running, reference to what I said earlier, the shadows generated by the tree, it is not being rendered for each block. The tree is generating it because the shadow does not move. This is in fact part of the tree's sprite, which means, for what I was thinking earlier, my estimations were off. My estimations earlier was I assumed that they could only go about as much as halfway into the surrounding tiles, where I came up with, I think 72 by, and I'm forgetting the height right now, I want to say 59 pixels for the size of the creatures. If this shadow is in fact just naturally part of the sprite for the tree, then this means that you should be able to do a 3x3 square. Possibly more, because some trees are 2x2, which means the animation for that particular thing would be 4x4. But if we only make the assumption right now that entities are 1 square, we can assume 3x3. Now, sprites for creatures, I don't think have as much room as a sprite for a terrain entity like a tree. So 3x3 is a bit much. But my earlier video's limitation of half of one, half of the other, 2 total width by 1.5, can now be a lot bigger because we see sprites going down south. I don't think that would work well on moving creatures for sprites. I still think they're gonna have to stick with where it is and go up, but the sizing is now bigger than my earlier estimations. And also, just look at this animation. This is a brook. This is the type of stream that you can walk across even without it being frozen, and you have no problems and you have no chance of drowning. We can see, because of the hillish systems, we can see the part of it that's connected to the ground and the part that isn't, but it's all safe to walk across, and it looks nice and animated. How is this going to work with 7 out of 7 depth? I don't know, except for I'm assuming from what we saw in that previous picture that is how they're representing just regular non-moving water in that regard for just water. They have also put up a picture of a murky pool / pond, so we can see just natural waves going across it. And again, the shadows on the water do not move. That is part of the tree sprite itself. It is being rendered on top of it by a transparent tree sprite. There is an issue with this. One, this looks gorgeous. I love this. I really do. But I want to point out that if you look at what I'm showing here and or the picture on Steam, there's an issue with the picture, not with the engine. And the issue is, if you sit there and stare at the water, there's a hiccup. There is a big hiccup and there's a little hiccup in the animation cycle right around the end. That's because, as I had mentioned, that they said, at least I think I did, this is my second or third time recording this, it is a 16 frame animation, but if we look down at the picture that I'm able to keep getting off of Steam, this animation cycle is 17 frames, which means I think they saved it with 1 extra frame, unfortunately. If we take this last frame and remove it, bring it down to what the brook was and what they are saying they're doing, a 16 frame animation, the big hiccup at the end of it is gone and it looks a lot smoother. This is in fact what I think the engine is capable of doing. The weird hiccup you see in the Steam page, I suspect is purely because for some reason they have a 17th frame for their 16 frame animation, which means it shows the first frame twice, which causes issues. Now, different frames have different times. I do not know why they're doing this. So there's still a slight hiccup in the middle where it goes from a 0.15 to a 0.06. So one of these goes fast, one of these goes really, really slow. But this is how their picture is done. So I'm assuming that they either intended this or this is just the way the engine is doing it. For a nice clear picture though, I balanced everything out to 0.09. And this is what it would look like in a perfect loop without those natural hiccups of 0.15 and 0.06, which is, it's gorgeous. Might be a little too mechanical. I'm wondering if that's why they have differing times on their frames. I do not know though, but this is what they have that the Dwarf Fortress engine can apparently render right now. We've yet to see how this works on waterfalls, oceans, and proper flows of water with less than 7 depth. I don't know how they're going to render that, but that is what I'm excitedly waiting for in their next couple of updates, is to see what they do with differing water depths. If you've come this far, it means you're either a dwarf of the mountain home or an elf sent here to spy on us. Pledge yourself to the dwarven industrial might by giving the video a thumbs up, subscribing to the channel, or reveal your vile elven ways by giving a thumbs down. Either way, migration waves help the fort grow, so spread the news of our might to all your friends. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.